If you are struggling with AFib or high blood pressure or other facets that affect the heart, and you're eating a carnivore diet and you just don't understand why you're not finding the benefits as much as the average person eating a carnivore diet, you probably want to hear this interview. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition, and I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing, and that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Jack Wolfson. He is a Arizona-based cardiologist. We talk about all things nutrition and lifestyle and what are big factors that actually contribute to heart health or heart risks and cardiovascular events that are not as discussed in the wellness space and also in conventional healthcare. As much as I knew that some of these factors played a risk with heart disease, I was surprised to hear him say that it is one of the biggest contributors of why heart disease can occur. Surprisingly, he's also against the CAC test, and he actually has some legitimate reasons. Make sure to watch this full interview, as heart disease is the #1 cause of death, and this interview may just save your heart health. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Dr. Wolfson. I'm very excited to finally have you on. For the people that may not know you, if you can introduce yourself and share your story and why you call yourself the natural heart doctor.
Yeah, so I'm a board certified cardiologist like my father before me. So I'd like to say that I was born into the medical matrix. My entire life, I wanted to be just like my father, wanted to be a cardiologist like him, and I would achieve all that. And along the way, my father became sick, and eventually he would be diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic with something similar to Parkinson's called progressive supranuclear palsy. And the Mayo Clinic had no idea what caused it, and there was no treatment for him. And they said he would be dead within 3 years. Well, at that exact same time, when all that was going on, I would meet this young chiropractor, and she told me all the reasons why my father is sick and dying because of the way that he eats, the way that he lives, so on and so forth. And so all these different things. So the Mayo Clinic is nothing. 29-year-old chiropractor. She tells me all the reasons. It made perfect sense. I would fall in love with this young woman very quickly. We would get married, 4 children later. And then I would leave the biggest group in the state of Arizona as a hospital-based cardiologist. And then in 2012, start my company, Natural Heart Doctor.
Okay, and so your switch from natural heart doctor, like what makes you different as a natural heart doctor versus, standard cares in the hospital cardiology?
Well, I mean, just about everything's different, except for I guess we're both trying to achieve that heart specialty and take care of the heart. They just look at it through the pharmaceutical and surgical lens, and I look at through the preventive strategies that pharma and surgery last, as opposed to they think about that first. I reach into the toolbox as far as the causation. Why do people develop high blood pressure and coronary artery disease and abnormal lipids and cardiomyopathy and atrial fibrillation? Always asking for the why. And that is undoubtedly the best approach, because the pharmaceutical approach, when you look at the data, it's not impressive at all.
And then in terms of some of those illnesses, what are some of the primary factors that we get high blood pressure or we have AFib or some of these other cardiovascular illnesses?
Well, I would call that the violations of things like eating well, living well, and thinking well. So we want to eat well, live well, think well, and that's going to be the strategy to recover. And that's some basic tenets that we have at Natural Heart Doctor and what I call our 100-year heart method. So it's eat well, live well, think well, test, don't guess. And I'm not talking about 1970s basic testing. I'm talking about the most advanced ultra diagnostics, blood, stool, urine that, again, that are state of the art technology. Yeah, and then the evidence based supplements, the biohacking strategies. And there's a time and a place for pharmaceuticals, and there's a time and a place for certainly for emergency medicine, trauma, they're great at. But when it comes to the prevention, treatment, and reversal and chronic disease, they have nothing. Statin drugs are not an answer. High blood pressure drugs are absolute poison. They're not helping anybody, and they're actually, because people think they're getting help, they have this false sense of security. I can take a Lipitor and eat whatever I want. I can, take my blood pressure drugs. My blood pressure is normal. I'm just like you, Dr. Judy and Dr. Jack. I'm totally normal. You're not. You're not normal. If you're on drugs, you are at high risk, and you better figure out a strategy to get off of them.
There are people that will take so the some of the tests that are now more recommended are like the coronary artery calcium score or the CAC score. And let's say someone has an actual number, it's not a zero, so there's no previous plaque. There actually is some and it's hardened. But is there or have you seen that you can reverse that type of heart disease and other types of heart diseases? Are you able to reverse some of that?
All right, so that's a great question. And I want to say this. I've never ordered a coronary artery calcium scan in my life, and I don't support people getting it. I think radiation causes heart disease, causes cancer, causes people to die younger. Not that I think that, it's just it does, like radiation does. Now you can say, well, this is a low dose of radiation, and that may be true. But I would come back and say, how are we going to use that test meaningfully? So, whether or not you have high coronary calcium, I'm going to tell you to do the same things: eat well, live well, think well, test, don't guess, evidence based supplements, biohacking strategies. If one is going to say, okay, well, if I have coronary calcium, I'll take a statin. And if I don't have it, then I won't. Somebody could use that as a reason to do the test, but I don't prescribe statins, so that doesn't influence what I do. I have a lot of people who I consult with who have had the test done. I just certainly never encourage it to be done. Now, to answer your question, yes, we have seen coronary artery calcification reversal where people had a test at time zero, tested a year later, and there was a decrease in plaque burden. Now, I always, again, was against the repeat test. I would prefer to do it with blood, urine, and stool testing. So, for example, instead of waiting for a year to see how things are, why not get a marker of inflammation or oxidative stress or all these advanced testing modalities that are non-invasive, non-radiation based, and use those and say, okay, I'm on this particular diet and lifestyle plan, and because of that, my inflammation's better, my oxidative stress is better. And when you do that, who cares what your coronary calcification is? I may have, Judy, as we speak right now, I may have the worst coronary artery disease in the world. It's not bothering me. And if it's not getting any worse, or if one of those plaques doesn't break loose because my inflammation's low, oxidative stress is low, and all my numbers are optimized, I could live another 100,000 years with my pipes the way they are. Everyone who's listening right now, you could live for another 100,000 years with your pipes the way they are. You just don't want it to get worse, and you don't want a plaque to break loose. And you do that by eating well, living well, thinking well, and then doing the advanced testing and then using those biohacking strategies as needed.
So, what are some of those advanced tests? Because you're right. I mean, a lot of the doctors I interview, cardiologists, will say, yes, maybe just doing a lipid panel is not enough. So, why don't you do like a CAC scan? And it's interesting because my husband's family has early heart disease. And so he did one many years ago, and they said, don't do it for another 5 years. And it was because of the radiation. And I've never heard it again since. So I just sort of forgot about it. But that is interesting. I do think that's a very valid point. So, what are some tests? You mentioned inflammation, but what inflammatory markers then do you look at? And what inflammatory markers could you even look at in urine?
Well, can I say one thing real quick? Because you brought this up, and I want this to be very clear. Okay. Your genetics are perfect. Your husband's genetics are perfect. So are mine. That's how we can run and jump and see and feel and make babies. Genetically, we're perfect. Why would we be genetically programmed to have heart disease or strokes or cancer or anything? We're not. Everything is from man-made poisons, poisonous food, poisonous lifestyle, poisonous, mindset, if you will, stress and anxiety and worry and fear. So these are all the things that lead to disease. It's not our genetics. Now, doctors love genetics because that way, hey, you know what, Judy's husband, there's nothing you could do. You got a family history. You got to take the pharmaceuticals. So it makes it very easy for the doctors to do their job. And again, I just want everyone to understand that if you take these violations, again, of eat well, live well, think well, and you put it in one family, that family may have heart disease. Another family may have cancer. Another family may have dementia. Another family may have all the above. Everybody's got their something. There's 100 million Americans with high blood pressure. Do they all have bad genetics? You know, I mean, it's such a cop out. It's absolutely horrific, and it's not true. Now, to answer your question, what are the things that we can really look at? I love those markers of inflammation and oxidative stress. Things, of course, like HSCRP, which everybody can get. Things like phospholipase A2. There's other in-depth inflammatory markers, but just even those two would be a good start. Markers of oxidative stress, oxidized LDL, looking for damaged LDL particles. MPO, myeloperoxidase, old time test, been around for like 40 plus years. You can get that test, and that gives you good data if you're under oxidative stress. My favorite, though, is something anybody can do at home. And they don't need a doctor's order. You can order it online. We sell it on our website. It's a test for lipid peroxides or oxidized lipids in the urine. No doctor, no blood, no testing facility. And that's what it is. And it's really just a spectacular test, to look at those things. Now, there's other markers too that people can get into. They look at LP little a. That's a great marker. Is it a genetic marker? Yes. But why? It must exist in 15, 20, 25% of the population because it has a benefit. And if we live a poisonous lifestyle, LP little a is not a good thing to have. So LP little a, homocysteine, intracellular vitamins and minerals, glutathione, omega-3 fatty acids, CoQ10, leaky gut microbiome, environmental toxins by urine, mold mycotoxins, environmental toxins, plastic. Look at the recent study that came out about plastic that showed people with evidence of microplastic in their carotid artery plaque when it was removed during a surgery. They divided those people into two groups. One group had plastic under a microscope. The other didn't. Surprisingly, they were able to find people without plastic in their arteries. So 2/3 of the participants had plastic, 1/3 did not. The group that had plastic had 3 times the rate of heart attack, stroke, and dying in a 3-year period than those without plastic. That makes plastic a bigger risk factor than smoking, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure combined.
And where would we get a lot of these plastics?
Well, I mean, it's just you just breathe in the air. Like I'm sitting in my car right now. I mean, I'm breathing in plastic. Obviously, plastic in water bottles, plastic in food containers, plastic in just the water supply. That's there, and like city water, what gets filtered out, what doesn't. It's in the air. It's aerosolized. There's the plastic in like personal care products, for example, plastic bottles, plastic tubes. How about coffee cups that are lined with plastic and there's a plastic lid? And yes, we can test for BPA, but there's other components of the plastic, and this they actually didn't test for BPA. They were actually looking at plastic and plastic under a microscope, and they also found out, which is not surprising, that people with plastic, they had a lot more evidence of inflammation. So what happens is you got this foundation of healthy living, healthy lifestyle and stuff like that. But when you're not doing those things appropriately, including environmental toxins, now you have inflammation, oxidative stress, and that is all linked to disease. And that's how it all goes down. So it's great. It's much more important to measure markers of inflammation and stress than it is lipids, although they often go hand in hand. But back to the coronary artery calcification. Somebody may have coronary calcification because they grew up in a house with secondhand smoke, but they only tested when they were 60, but that's all remnant from when they were a child. So does that mean that your carnivore diet is off? Does that mean that your paleo diet is off? Does that mean that your plan is wrong because you have remnants of scar tissue from when you were a child? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Now, if you're following a particular plan, call it of nutrition, carnivore, getting sunshine, getting good sleep, getting good physical activity, doing all these things. If you do all these things and your stress and inflammation are high, you better figure out why. Contrary, if you're doing all these great things and your inflammatory markers are under control, pat yourself on the back. You're doing a great job. Continue.
So what's interesting is one of the reasons I found you is that I work with some of the most chronically ill in the carnivore space. So maybe their CRP actually looks really good. It's less than 1, but you'll see, and then they're eating the carnivore diet. So lots of their oxidative stress markers look pretty good. but we find that they're not fully well. So they're still symptomatic. Maybe they're more fatigued. Maybe they're just waking up multiple times in the night and it's not hypoglycemia. Maybe their hormones still need some levels of support. And what we have found over the years that mold illness and environmental toxins play a big part. And I know you've written many different articles on that and even talk about it on your podcast. And so if you can share, how does environmental toxins, especially mold or water damaged buildings, affect a person and the heart?
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of when we talk about this 100-year heart method and the eat well, live well, think well, they're all equally as important. But I go into some of these carnivore groups, the lean mass hyper responder groups. I see the commentary and I get these people also in consultation. And I just want people to know it's only part of the story. Now, personally, I'm a paleo guy, right? My book's called The Paleo Cardiologist. Hunter gatherer. I can berate the carnivore diet all day long. I know people are feeling great on it. I know that it's just I don't think it's most natural, but I do think that a lot of people can thrive on it, kind of coming from where they're at, because I think that, again, it likely is better than other diets they were on before, and because it is eliminating potential irritants, whether, plant-based foods, that somebody would say, well, there's oxalates and it generates histamines and all these different things. There's lectins in a lot of these foods. Yeah, I get it. But our ancestors, they're walking around. They see broccoli, they're going to eat broccoli. Same thing with a lion. Lions are not 100% carnivore. And let me say one more thing too. Carnivore, those people, they must eat seafood. If you're not eating seafood, you're making a huge mistake. Huge. Seafood is the most important food on the planet. I don't care. Sean Baker says, any of these other carnivore people, I could care less what they think. People with the highest omega-3s from eating seafood have the lowest risk of everything. So, but it's not just about the food, right? It's
Right.
about our lifestyle. It's about the sleep. It's about the sunshine. It's about the physical activity and movement. It's about being under the care of a chiropractor. It's about holistic dentistry, sources of chronic infections, and it's about the environmental toxins. I don't care what diet you're on. If you're living in a water damaged building with mold and or bacterial growth, you're going to be sick. Let me say this. There is evidence in the medical literature. These mold mycotoxins, they interfere with LDL receptors. Therefore, you don't clear out old LDL particles. They interfere with the ApoB lipoprotein, so it doesn't dock on an LDL receptor. It interferes with PCSK9, which is responsible for the degradation and the production of LDL receptors. Just from these mold mycotoxins lead to autonomic dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction. They damage the gut microbiome. Everybody knows how important the gut microbiome is. How do you know that mold mycotoxins do that? Have you ever heard of penicillin? Penicillin is a mold mycotoxin that comes from the penicillium mold that kills bacteria. It was serendipitously discovered by Fleming 100 years ago. So if you're essentially living in a home that is giving you antibiotics, destroying your gut microbiome, leading to leaky gut, inflammation, ox stress, on and on and on, you're done. And the carnivore diet may help you feel better. It's certainly better than, its survivability, eating McDonald's cookies and cupcakes. And if you're not tolerating, cucumbers, if I eat cucumbers, my stomach just turns. I mean, like, what? What are people talking about? There's no reason for that. A healthy person in the wild eats these things and they don't have a problem. So I'm okay with carnivore. I like carnivore for cleanses. Definitely eat a lot of seafood. That's for sure. Don't worry about plastics in the seafood or other toxins in the seafood. The whole planet's destroyed, unfortunately. So, and I do, when it comes to carnivore, I love eating the organs. I love eating bison as my preferred animal product as well. But please do not forget the other things about living well. And then also the thinking well is also critically important. And the thinking well are levels of stress, worry, anxiety, fear. And there's fear of having a heart attack or fear of having another heart attack or fear you're on the wrong diet. Fear is a major problem in society.
Okay, let me say something before I think the carnivore community gets mad if I don't take a stance. But we in our practice use carnivore as an elimination diet. So when people are really sick, they've been to all the standard care doctors, and we have people that work with over 20 doctors, spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands, and they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So they hear like the Peterson stories of their inflammation, autoimmune illness really improving. And so they're really just desperate of, I'm not trying to be cool. I'm not trying to be a biohacker. I just want to get better, not feel unwell. So they go on these carnivore diets, including myself. And when I went on it, and many of these other people, they see, and I think what it is it just provides a reduction of inflammation. And yes, we're getting off the processed foods. Yes, we're getting off a lot of the food dyes and the additives and the all the other negative things. But there is truth where certain plants, and like you talked about oxalates, certain people are sensitive to gluten, right? So paleo diets don't use gluten or don't eat lots of the wheat foods and stuff because gluten is really hard on the gut and it's a harsh protein. And every plant has some level of toxins. But I agree with you. I think that if you are a relatively healthy person, you should be able to tolerate a cucumber, even with the seeds and maybe some of the skin. But I think that, as you said, the world is very sick. And so it's almost that we have to go a 180-degree flip. And that's where carnivore can help. And when you are so sick and you try carnivore and you start feeling better, you can decide then, can I bring back certain healthier vegetables that maybe I miss or that may provide me something and variety, or just to be more resilient with my health instead of just eating meat. But for some people, they're so sick still. And I think it's because they're not considering, like you said, the stress, the fear, the mindset, the environmental toxins. And so I think I'm one of the few people that originally in the diet where most of us think the carnivore diet fixes everything. And I learned very quickly in my practice, actually it doesn't, because you actually need to work on the mind body, as you said, as well as the air we breathe. I think that was one small benefit of COVID is we started becoming hyper aware of the people around us breathing and what we're breathing in. And if we understand that, then if our homes are bad and there's a lot of VOCs and mold and water damage, how are those things not making us sick when they actually are? So I fully am on the same page. I think if you're healthy, you should be able to tolerate berries and some cucumbers. But the world has become so sick that some people just, whether it's a band-aid then after a while using carnivore as a band-aid because you are not working on all the other things you've mentioned. But I think that's where people start eating a carnivore diet and it makes sense for them.
Yes, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not down on carnivore at all. That's why you have me on here. Because I'm out here to, again, put flames on the water onto the carnivore, meat and food. So I do think that there is a lot of value. I'm not going to equate that, obviously, so it's not like, okay, well, I'm anti-carnivore and I'm anti-vegan. Like, I'm totally anti-vegan. I would never recommend veganism for cleanse or anything.
Right.
Carnivore, I think, can make a lot of people feel better. But just as you said, people are still struggling, and I've seen them on carnivore, and
Right.
or even maybe they feel good, but their markers are off, specifically inflammation. And so let's just dig, deeper into the why. Don't, if you're going to go carnivore, please don't forget the seafood. I think that's absolutely critical. It's kind of like when people talk about veganism. It's like there's never been a pure vegan society or a pure vegan animal in the history of the world. Everybody eats either other animals or insects. They're always eating something. The vegan is the experiment. So, when it comes to, veganism, I would never tell anybody to ever do that because no one's ever done that in the history of the world. It's like if someone said, we got this new thing and it's called helium. So let's all breathe helium because it gives better results. You would laugh in that person's face.
Right.
Just like
Right.
you would laugh in the vegan's face and say, it doesn't matter. It's not common sense. It's not natural. And then to the carnivore side, I would also say that pure carnivore in a long-term strategy, it's not a natural approach because our ancestors, every single one of them was a hunter-gatherer. And then, carnivore, because people are like, can I have dairy on carnivore? You can do whatever you
Right.
want. If you like dairy and you tolerate dairy, then dairy in its raw form can be good. Are eggs carnivore or, strictly or not? I mean, of course they are, as far as I'm concerned, but should some, a lot of people can't tolerate eggs either. So
Yes.
it's almost like this kind of variance of carnivore. But hopefully you get my point, on all of this. I just think, again, if our ancestors are walking around as hunter gatherers, maybe they didn't have meat. and maybe they ate dandelion green. When they saw fruit, you don't think our ancestors would eat
Right.
fruit and honey? They would probably kill people. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
or a rock at somebody in order to get the honey. And then, there's also this guy people have heard of, probably, his name is Paul Saladino, right? So Saladino, now he's eating fruits, now he's eating honey, now he's liberalizing. I do know Paul. I've met him in person several times down in Costa Rica. I think he's a good man, but I don't think he feels well. I don't think he feels well. And that's why he's changing his diet and he's looking for something. And most recently, he's been talking about something that my wife and I told him about years ago. And that's he lives in mold. And when you live in mold and you travel in mold, you live in the water damage, you're never going to feel great. You're
Right.
not. It's certainly not for the long term. You may improve short term, have ups and downs. You got to go deeper than just the diet, people.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I knew him many years ago when he was really strict carnivore, and I suspected he was suffering from chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Obviously, I'm not going to share that publicly, but we are now. And I always suspected there was some level of mold illness or it wasn't the diet specifically that was affecting him, that where it's the carbs or not, or the honey or not, or the sun or not. But I think he's missing the environmental toxin piece, which when he started talking about mold illness, which I've heard recently, I'm like, yes, finally, hopefully he finds his answers. But I fully agree with you. I think there was something there that was not the diet specifically, but that it was something related to environmental toxins. If you can share with us, so we, as you were saying, we also see carnivores that are really strict carnivores, and it's not like they're cheating and it's not like they're doing other things, but we do really see that they are eating their best or as clean or doing that elimination diet, and then they still have an AFib attack. And so obviously it's not because the diet is wrong or there's something with the diet, but I suspect that they're suffering from mold illness, or maybe some people still have high blood pressure on a carnivore diet. So can you talk a little bit more about, like, how does mold affect my heart?
Yeah, so mold does so many different things. In fact, I have a blog post called 14 Ways 14 different mechanisms of mold induced cardiovascular toxicity. And that's not even talking about the water damage bacteria, but the water damage molds. I think really simplistically, it starts by destruction of the gut microbiome, leading to intestinal hyperpermeability. And this is all in the literature. Then now you have intestinal hyperpermeability. Now things get into the body, including the molds and other toxins, that people are exposed to, and other, food particles. And that may even be, cucumber, proteins, to go back to that. And then now the immune system kicks in, inflammation, oxidative stress, and that leads to endothelial dysfunction, autonomic dysfunction. One of the things that I'm big on is that I look for anti-actin antibodies. So if you have anti-actin antibodies, actin, of course, is a protein found in all muscular tissue. All cells that divide contain actin and myosin, but this actin in muscle tissue, including cardiac muscle, if your immune system and high antibodies are attacking the actin protein, you're going to have AFib, you're going to have coronary artery disease. So, there's so many hypercoagulability that affects the cardiovascular system. Like we said, endothelial dysfunction, certainly abnormalities in cardiac rhythm for those reasons, but also, likely because of autoimmune attack on the actual electrical, conducting system of the heart. I mean, you can make the case for it either directly or indirectly in dozens of ways.
Okay, so if I hear you correctly, even if my diet's good and I'm getting sunlight and exercise, I could still possibly have a cardiovascular event because I'm living in mold.
1,000%.
Okay.
1,000%. It may be at the end of the day, Judy, that mold living in a water damaged building from a leaky faucet, shower sink, toilet, excess humidity, flood, roof leak may be the single most dangerous thing of all. Because here's what's interesting. A lot of times we talk about metals, we talk about mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and stuff like that. But those do not have the deliberate intention of killing somebody, right? So lead in paint doesn't think, I'm going to kill the inhabitants of this house. Mold does.
Right.
Mold is a living, breathing organism that releases the mycotoxins because that's its survival mechanism. That's why the penicillium species releases what we now know as penicillin to kill bacteria so the bacteria doesn't kill it. It's personal, you know,
Right.
it's personal. And it just drives me crazy, unfortunately, when people debate all the food story. And one thing I tell people, I'm like, whatever diet you follow, just make it organic. Get the chemicals and the poisons and the artificials out of your food. Whether you're a vegan, vegetarian, paleo, keto, carnivore, just eat organic food. I mean, if we can all agree on that, I don't know who's running around right now saying, oh, the food supply is so much better now that it's loaded with glyphosate and atrazine and DDT. Like, is anybody really saying that? I mean, it's so
Right.
destructive to the body. Let's just make sure we go organic and go from there.
Yeah, and I think everything what you just said makes sense. I mean, we think of mold and what is mold's role or fungus's role in the world? It's when things are decomposing, it helps to remove waste, right? And it's supposed to then recreate life. And but when I share this stuff, a lot of people say, well, mold is everywhere. I mean, you go to Asia, it's super humid, and even Costa Rica is pretty humid. But and how do you get the humidity down to the 50s so that there's no chance of mold growing? And so a lot of people say, you're asking us to fight this unavoidable fight where there it's impossible with the way that we build our homes and the water that we use in the homes that there won't be an amount of mold and then I'll never get better then. So what do you say to people like that?
Listen, you can throw your arms up in the air and just say, okay, there's nothing I could do about this, or you can do something about it. That's all there is to it. So, Paul down in Costa Rica, we have property down in Costa Rica. We're going to build mold free housing down there made out of concrete, steel, and glass. If you're sick, go live in a tent. Go down to Mexico in a tent. Go down to Florida. Go somewhere. I don't know, but go to Arizona. Where our main practice is at. I'm not saying it's easy. It's
Right.
real easy to go carnivore. It's real easy to get a better sleep and sunshine, and real easy to get more physical activity. That stuff is easy. Mold is a problem. And I'm not saying that the solution is easy, believe me. But if you're sick enough and you want to heal, then that's what you're going to look at. And unfortunately, 4 out of 5 times, Judy, it's the women that they're the canary in the coal mine. They feel lousy. The man, he's great. Oh, I feel good. I mean, you look at me, my muscles are good. I'm sleeping and all this stuff. Like, I don't have any problems. Meanwhile, they're about to have a heart attack, stroke, or cancer because they're living in mold. Because mold damages the immune system, it leads to cancer. It leads to brain-based diseases for all the reasons that we mentioned. It's a massive problem without easy answers, outside of the easy answer being, hey, go buy a tent, get brand new clothing, a brand new sleeping bag, and heal.
Yeah, we have
And
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, and I guess if you're carnivore in that context, it's pretty darn easy. If you're walking around like, hey, I'm eating raw meat and raw seafood, yeah, I guess life could be pretty easy if you get raw meat, raw seafood in a cooler and you go outside and recover, in nature. A lot of people have to do that. They do.
Yeah, we have clients that one of the beauties of going carnivore is that because it's such a simple elimination diet with not a lot of other foods, you're not eating like 50 different foods. And so at a certain point when they're not getting better, yet their markers may look decent, but their symptoms aren't better, then we know, okay, it's not a diet thing anymore. You need to also, and then if we work on sleep and exercise and all of the other things, and they're still not better, then the case for the environment becomes super easy to detect. And then we literally have clients right now living in tents because they're on a carnivore diet. They're doing all the things that you brought up, but they have to live in a tent in order to feel the benefits of fully feeling better. And now we have clients that are getting to an A grade. If you were to say A is the best, F is the worst, but now they're getting into an A grade of health when they were at like a C on a carnivore diet. And then prior to that, maybe they were at an F. So I do think there's merit to a lot of what you're saying. In terms of Lyme, so that's the other one that we see. What have you seen with Lyme, mold? Do you see that with managing mold and maybe your immune system can handle Lyme? What have you seen with both of them?
You just said it, Judy. You just said it. So if you have symptoms of Lyme, it's because you live in mold and or bacteria, water damage. Whether or not you actually have an active spirochete infection or chronic immune response from a tick bite 40 years ago, that remains to be seen. What never sat well with me are these people with chronic Lyme that have a port in their subclavian vein and they're getting IV antibiotics for 2 years. Like, People do that all the time, and that's absolutely horrific. When you take that person and you put them in a healthy, healing environment, and they eat well, live well, think well, those people will recover. Because again, is it Lyme? Is it CMV? Is it some other virus, some other bacteria, some other co-infection? It's not. You live in mold until proven otherwise, and you better prove it. Test, don't guess is what we say. Like, you may think your house is brand new. It doesn't matter if it's brand new, it still could have mold. If it's 50 years old, it has mold. It's, and again, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers living in and out of caves and stone huts and makeshift, shelters. And so if you return to that, which is not easy. I mean, obviously it's not easy. I mean, people have lost all of those skills to be able to do so. But I think it's an answer for a lot of people. And if you're sick enough, you're going to go do it.
I also think that if we think about just 150 years ago, not as many people were having cardiovascular events, and mold was still not really detected as it's a problem. But I think there was still some amount of mold in the home. So I just wonder, I know that there's a lot of toxins that we're now dealing with, but I just wonder if now that with the home being bad, or like the way that we're building our homes, and we're using basically paper material, and the diet, and the full stress, and all of these electronics and Wi-Fi and all of that, and then on top of that we are just stressed out, not sleeping well. I think it's all of that that is also adding to our illness. But that's why I think diet is so important, whether it's paleo. I think a lot of people heal with just paleo too. It's just maybe when you're sick enough you have to even go more strict. But I do think diet is so fundamental, as you said, also with sleep and light because of the vitamin D. But I just think, why was it 150 years ago? There probably was still mold, but people weren't as sick as they are now.
Well, I mean, to answer that, definitely for all the reasons you said, the toxin burden is, of course, the biggest it's ever been for
Yeah.
all the things that you mentioned. All the things that you mentioned, the toxin burden, the stress burden, everything is infinitely worse. But mold as a health concern, it's written in the Old Testament.
Yes.
It's in the Hebrew Bible. It's in the book of Leviticus. Moses writes about it 3,500 years ago, that if your house has mold, you need to take these certain actions. And if that doesn't solve the issue, you need to tear down your house and start over. He talks about it 3,500 years ago. It's always been a problem. But to your point, 150 years ago, homes weren't airtight. They weren't all synthetic. They were made out of natural materials. There was no synthetic carpet and synthetic walls and synthetic furniture. And the house actually could breathe. Now they fill it with 2 feet of insulation. That's all poison, all these different things. And then on top of it, the EMF, carbon monoxide, that happens, all these different exposures of people living in airtight homes, and they're living in high buildings. And, the sunshine, yeah, makes vitamin D. It also is responsible for the body making melatonin and nitric oxide and so many other infinite things that sunshine does, and how it improves mitochondrial function. So it's about getting back to the basics, but the medical community doesn't have a clue about the basics.
Well, what about COVID? So we see all these people dying suddenly in their 40s, and now it's become just a norm. How has COVID affected heart function?
Well, I mean, listen, we could have the COVID debate and conversation at any time. What was COVID? How did COVID affect people? What about the COVID shots? How did that affect people? How did the global shutdown affect people? Social isolation, losing businesses, stress, anger, fear, anxiety, go on and on and on. I happen to think it was the biggest perpetration of crime against humanity in the history of the world,
Agreed.
personally. I've seen total destruction from the shots in many different levels. I've seen a lot of sick people. So that being said, the key is always to have a bulletproof immune system. When you eat well, live well, think well, that's going to be the strategy. But the shot at the alleged purpose is, again, to generate an immune response, which is invariably going to cause a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress by definition. And one final thing about this, too, is that we should reserve the right to question these things. That's called freedom of speech, and the right to have these conversations on all platforms. Now, I understand Facebook and YouTube, these are all private entities, and they can, police things. But I will still maintain the right for the freedom of speech to be able to discuss these things, because that's where the truth comes out. So we need the freedom of speech to be able to question these things. And I would question everything. The history of the world has been full of evil people doing evil things for money and for power and control.
It's a struggle because a lot of our clients are actually not vaccinated because if they got it, they would most likely not be alive anymore. And we have a lot of people that did get vaccinated and they are more chronically ill now and they've never been better since COVID. So there's a lot of those stories. So it's really just unfortunate. You keep talking about think well and be well. So what is the thinking that you're talking about? So how do we we can control a lot of our diet. We can even maybe control our environment and fix our homes over and over. But how do we control the mind? Maybe we've had trauma in our past, or maybe it's just really hard for us to, like what we just talked about. It's might as well, like, why am I sharing about meat when the world can end tomorrow? Right. So, how do we change our mindset? Like, how do we do that to not be overly releasing cortisol and all our stress hormones and constantly being in a fight or flight, which is totally negative to our immune system? How do we shift that and actually think right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's all. At the end of the day, I am a North suburban Chicago Jewish kid whose father was a cardiologist. Like I'm not the guy you want to bunker down with in the survival times. Okay, that's not me. But to your point, think well. Find your happy. If you're not happy right now, you have to find your happy. That can be done through gratitude. That can be done through spirituality. That could be done through your community, your sense of community. That could be done for self-acceptance and feelings of self-worth. A lot of people do have childhood trauma. They've got a lot of things they need to unpack. Work with someone to unpack them. Get a social worker, anybody but a psychiatrist, obviously, for those reasons that as far as like the pill pushers of what they are. Speak to somebody, talk to somebody. There's a gazillion social workers that are out there, psychologists, therapists that you can work with. There's books that you can read. This is not my area of expertise, which is why I employ people, that I know that is an area of need. I could, like you, I could talk about food. I could talk about sunshine and sleep and mold and toxins. I could talk about that all day long very easily. But these other ideas about, meditation, yoga, biohacking strategies to assist with engaging the autonomic nervous system, it has to be addressed. It has to be looked at. And you could be doing all the eating and living things, but if you're living in fear and stress, or you're harboring these childhood traumas, they are very inflammatory, because when your brain thinks that it's about to get eaten by a tiger, all the inflammation, all the stress, everything is ready for injury. It's like when you are about to taste a bite of a lemon, or you visualize lemon and now you're prepared for lemon coming in. Your body's prepared for trauma. And if your body is prepared for trauma and you have all these immune system activation, inflammation, stress ready to go, it's a factor as well. And that's why you got to really focus on all three of these things to achieve optimal success.
If you were to have to start with just one, and I know it's kind of hard to even say that, but if you were to start with one, like some basic tips to start with, what would you recommend starting with first?
Number one would be to go to sleep earlier. Sleep came first. Sleep came, the biblical version, evolutionary version. First there was darkness, then there was light, which means there was circadian rhythm. So as life came onto Earth, there were circadian rhythms, and humans are built to go to sleep after the sundown shortly and then wake up before the sunrise. Watch the sunrise, spend the day in and out of the sun with their solar panel, aka their skin exposed, their eyeballs exposed, and then you go to bed after the sundown. Therefore, you don't get the artificial light, you sleep naturally. People with a self-reported history of what's called eveningness, meaning that they're night owls, they're night people. With other risk factors controlled for, they've got double the risk of excess coronary calcification than the people who go to sleep on time. Go to sleep earlier, people. That is fundamental. Sleep deprivation is torture. If you're not, there's every study that shows that if you sleep less than 6 hours, you have an increased risk for everything. Go to sleep.
What about the people that say, but I don't need a lot of sleep? I hear people say, I only need 5 hours of sleep and I function ever since I was young.
I think they're going to die earlier.
Okay.
Do I think that some people could survive better and survive longer, even though they're getting less sleep than somebody else? Again, I think it's one of the factors. But yeah, 5 hours I don't think is going to be congruent with life, and the literature supports that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think this is so important. I really wanted to get you on here because there was a client that recommended your work, especially in terms of mold illness. And I was so glad to see a cardiologist that talks about something beyond LDL, and all of the diet is important and such stuff. But I think the environmental part is so important and we don't talk about it enough. And the easy answer is always, well, it's everywhere, so it's not something we could fix, but I think we absolutely need to, and it's imperative. And so I just appreciate you, being able to vocalize and share that it is a huge problem. So where can people find you and your practice and your all your social medias?
Yeah, I just want to circle back to and thank you for saying all that. It's wonderful to be on. It's like these lean mass hyper responders, these people with total cholesterols, six, 700, sometimes even higher, and everybody gets into panic mode. If your levels of inflammation and stress are normal, I would not be panicking at all. For those, lipid numbers, they have various effects, to it or not. It's all about, looking at, ratios, apolipoprotein B, apolipoprotein A ratio. This whole concept of LDL is bad and HDL is good, that's pure pharmaceutical company speak. LDL has a purpose. HDL has a purpose. There are good LDLs and bad LDLs. There are good HDLs and there are bad dysfunctional HDLs that
Yes,
we can
that's true.
understand. So anyways, my website's Natural Heart Doctor. You can get a copy, go to my website, you can get a copy of, my book, freeheartbook.com, and you can get that all there.
I just wanted to say something about the LMHR. So what I find is interesting is, like you said, a lot of people think HDL is good, LDL is bad. In the carnivore space, people understand that LDL can go up on this way of eating. And so they understand that it's just not the conventional wisdom of LDL bad, total cholesterol over 200 or 180 or something is bad. But I do see when HDL is high, above 85-ish, we know that there's inflammation somewhere. And we also see that with high ferritin, that's also a sign of inflammation. And it's not just that you're storing too much iron, that's actually indicative of something that's inflammatory in your system. So I appreciate you for bringing that on. So are you not concerned with people that are LMHRs as long as there's other sign, like all the other metrics that you test have low inflammation?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, the more markers of inflammation we test for, probably the better, but even just the basics, HSCRP, oxidized LDL, those markers I think are all beneficial.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time again. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I hope this interview brought light as to why maybe sometimes carnivore or a specific diet is not improving your heart health further. You may have to check your home and your oral health and other stressors that are impacting your autonomic nervous system and causing your body to stress out, and then also causing the stress on your heart. But more than anything, as he said, mold illness is very real and mold can be affecting your heart. We didn't get a touch on POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is when you basically stand up and you get really dizzy. You may need a lot more salt than usual or the average person. So if you suffer from dysautonomia or POTS, these are also symptoms that you may be suffering from mold illness. Again, it is really hard to get rid of all mold in the home, but for sure, if you have water damage, you must remediate, or it can be a hazard to your health. If you want to learn more about all the information and the evidence-based research, make sure to look at the links, as I will post his article that talks about heart health and how mold illness affects it. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat, take care of your bodies and your homes, because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.